Hello and welcome to Bottom Line. I'm Cindy Kainz. We have a terrific show for you today. We're going to talk about improving your presentation skills, and I have an author and a speaker here who has a video out called Present Like a Pro. I'd like to introduce my guest for today's show, Michael Angelo Caruso. Welcome to the show.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Well, Michael, you know, you've been on Bottom Line, so thank you for coming back and helping us and the audience understand how to do better presentations. Not just the PowerPoint presentations, but actually being up there speaking, how to prepare, what to look out for, the do's and don'ts. So with all that, I'm going to probably ask you for maybe first a little background on yourself. How did you get into wanting to help people with their presentation skills?
Well, I started in my young adult life doing presentations as a professional musician. And every night we went on and gave a presentation, right? The band would play 4 45-minute sets and try to keep people's attention, figure out what worked, catch the rhythm of the audience, all that sort of thing. What I learned later in life is that everything is a presentation. Musical performances, speeches, interviews. I'm presenting to you right now, you're presenting to me live, and in a few hours it'll be another form of presentation in terms of a video broadcast, right? So everything's a presentation. It's a very important skill to have.
Right. Now, most people, of course, are just nervous. It's not something they're comfortable with because we don't do it a lot, or, you know, you may have to do it in front of your peers. You may have to even give a speech, you know, outside of work in front of friends, family, and that can just be difficult. So when people have to approach doing some kind of presentation or speech in front of an audience, what are some of the first things they should think about?
Well, it almost it seems like something I shouldn't have to mention, but preparation's a really good thing. And I'll tell you that most professional speakers, even people in my business, are notoriously lazy and under-rehearsed. There's something about winging it that's very impressive to people until they get up there and find out that they're not quite as good as they thought they were. I always say presenting is a little bit like driving. Everybody thinks they're pretty good at it, but there's a lot of dented cars on I-75. We're not as good as we think we are at presenting.
Well, let's say we'll take someone, let's use an example of a work environment. There's a particular area that they may know and their expertise in, and they have to present in front of peers.
Sure. And
they have to get up in front of an audience and say 100 people of their peers, maybe people who are in leadership positions higher than them, and they have to give this speech. Now, if they're going to, let's say they use PowerPoint, which is maybe a particular presentation tool or some kind of software out there that allows them to create presentations.
Sure.
What are the first things that they should do to present and get prepared for this, you know, the speech, the beginning, the middle, the end?
Sure. It's interesting you should mention them in that order, the beginning, the middle, and the end. I recommend beginning with the end. In fact, you want to start with what's called the call to action. So you'd ask yourself this question right out of the box. What is the number one thing I want my audience to do after my presentation? Because you would never give a presentation just to disseminate information. So I don't like it when people say, I just wanted to make sure you had this information. That's the biggest lie ever told. You want them to do something with the information. And ideally, and this sounds bad, but it's true, behavior modification. You want them to do something differently as a result of the presentation. This can be best achieved by orchestrating a call to action, which happens at the end of the presentation, but is seeded throughout the presentation in things like trial closes or even building rapport or building the relationship.
Now, when someone gets ready to do a presentation, they're sitting down, they're thinking about, okay, I need to put these slides together. Again, thinking how logically to go about that. Now, you mentioned a call to action at the end.
Right.
Do you put something at the very front of your presentation to say, this is what I'd like to, you know, accomplish, or this is what I'd like you to do after you've heard my presentation? Sure.
You might even begin the presentation by saying, well, first I'm going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and at the end of my presentation I'm going to have you be comfortable enough where you might want to do this. So I'm already giving you a preview of coming attractions. Think of it like a movie where instead of looking at one frame of the movie, we're moving all the way through the movie, all the way through the frames to the end of the movie and actually telling them what's going to happen at the end. Nobody wants to be surprised in presentations, especially your boss.
Right. Now, as someone prepares, and we'll kind of keep on that maybe for a moment, what things should they think about? How should they think about where they're going to present?
Sure.
You know, how big the room is or auditorium. Think about how they should dress, how they should present themselves. Should they start with a joke? Should they start with, you know, getting right to the point?
Yeah, I think they should think about all of the above. The clothing and the venue or the location of the presentation, a lot of these types of things come together. Of course, it's a good idea to visit the presentation site beforehand if you're not familiar with it. I think people give way too much attention to PowerPoint and not enough attention to imagining what the room's going to look like and imagining a way that they're going to build rapport with the audience. For example, I don't recommend using PowerPoint at all if you don't have to. If you're a really good speaker, you should be able to convey almost everything you need to convey just by looking at people's eyes and gesticulating in proper ways, building continuity between your verbals and your nonverbals. If you must use PowerPoint, I recommend using it only in the middle third of the presentation. Why? Because the first third is about building rapport. Again, the trial closes, the yes questions, getting the audience to nod their head with you. And then in the last third, you want to turn the PowerPoint off so that you can move to the call to action. I often notice, as I do sales training and leadership training across the country, Cynthia, that when salespeople spend all that time and energy getting you into the room, and then they say, would you please look away from me while I turn off the lights and have you look at the screen? It doesn't make any sense. So have people get into you. You know, you're talking to them. You're not. And another thing with PowerPoint is you have to actually turn around and face the other way to face the screen, or you're looking in your monitor all the time. Why wouldn't you want to look at your most important people in the room, which are your prospects and clients?
Right, because by turning away, not only do you turn your head, you're not looking, but usually your voice then does not project out. It's projecting into the screen or into the wall. And
that's right.
What are some of the biggest don'ts that you have, that you've learned and tried to help people over the years when they do presentations? You know, maybe it's the dress, maybe it's how they present, you know, the eye contact. What are some things that you'd say that you see people doing that they shouldn't be?
Well, let's talk about what the major problem is for most speakers is some sort of an attack of the nerves, even if it's just anxious, or some people call it excited, some people call it a breakdown, whatever you want to call it. What happens is you become a person other than your natural self when you speak. So I tell people that you should think more of yourself when you're speaking, right? Your motion should get bigger. Your volume should pump up just a little bit when you speak. And yet when most people speak, they think less of themselves, so their body becomes smaller. They start gripping the podium. Their volume in their voice goes down, not up. And they become this meek shadow of their former selves. I think that's something to think about. And when I do training in my home for people that fly in from all over the country. I do training in classroom sessions. I always tell people when they come in that you need to think more of yourself when you're speaking. You need to almost become an actor or an actress in that moment.
Right. Almost overacting, so to speak, or over-presenting.
Because when they see their video, they look at themselves and they say, geez, I thought I was smiling when I presented, but they weren't smiling at all, and the video shows it. That's what's so powerful about the training that I do, is I do a baseline video to show how you would speak normally without me or anybody coaching you. And then after I'm done with you, I'll show you just a few things. It's like changing a golf swing where you're hitting the ball further and straighter, and then all of a sudden you're smiling and you're more animated, and if anybody else is in the room, they often get a standing ovation just because we tweaked a few things.
Right. What if people are feeling a little uncomfortable with the subject matter? It's always nice when you have the slides, because just in case you need a little help walking through, but let's say they feel more comfortable holding notes, or feel they need notes, just because, again, maybe they're not, you know, fully aware of all the information they want to present, or in the way that they're presenting it. How do you feel about index cards or having notes or sheets of paper?
Nothing wrong with holding notes. In fact, you'll notice most newscasters actually hold a piece of paper, especially if they're standing up. There's nothing on the paper. It's often just a folded prop that they use, but it makes them look smarter or more together. Same thing with every newscaster holding a pen, which they never use. It's a prop designed to make them look competent and important, which of course they are if they're delivering a good newscast. I recommend for people who are trying to speak without notes a technique I actually coined. It's called the power of three, and it works like this. Let's say you have an hour's notice and your boss knocks on your door or your cube and he says, I want you to stand in for so-and-so at lunchtime and give the presentation.
Like that never happens. So
yeah, right. And so the first thing you would do, of course, is cuss out your boss for not giving you any notice. The very second thing you should do is hold out your three fingers like this, and then say to yourself, if I was only going to teach these people three things in my short presentation at lunch, what would they be? Now, this is called a mnemonic device, because you start using now these three fingers as triggers that will actually help you remember what you're going to talk about when you get into the program. So the power of three works like this. The number one thing, or the first thing I want to teach them, is this. The second thing I want to teach them is this, and you tap each time, and the third finger is this, right? So this could be alphabetical. It could be spatial, for example. This is what I want you to know about my program. This is how I want you to, why I want you to like it, and this is what I want you to go tell people about it. So head, heart, and legs, right?
Okay.
Head, heart, and legs is actually alphabetical as well.
Right.
So now all these things are starting to help you remember, and you don't even know it. It's going to work in your subconscious even. When you get in front of the room, you say, hello, everybody. I just wanted to tell you it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Do not tell them you're nervous. Do not tell them you only had an hour to prepare. Get right into it. There are only 3 things I want to share with you. Number 1, number 2, and number 3. And the beautiful part about the power of 3 technique is it's transferable. Later, people will ask the audience members, what did you think of Caruso's presentation? Well, great. He told us 3 things. Let's see, they were this, this, and this.
And they'll actually use probably the hands as well to remember, because we do
exactly
that quite often. You know, people want to use it, and that's an excellent tool to help people do that.
Now, having said that, I mean, it might be a good idea to use talking points, or again, hold that folded sheet of
Right.
paper just in case you lose your place. But after enough practice, especially if you're focused on memorizing your talking points,
Right.
the power of 3 is a very good tool to have.
Now, I have to ask this question. You know, if you're out in front of the audience, you're talking to people, and maybe there's a podium, and maybe that's good because you can hold on. You know,
Sure.
'cause people might be a little nervous, and that kind of helps feel secure.
Sure.
What about eye contact? What happens if you are really nervous? And do you try to scan the audience? Do you try to look over them? And we might not mention some of the other things about, you know, the audience and that people use, but you know, what are some things that maybe someone can help as they're working on their presentation skills to start becoming more relaxed and a better speaker and seem more natural?
I think that if you start thinking about relaxing when you take your place at the podium, it's probably too late. My favorite technique for relaxing with my audience is to actually mingle with them in advance of the beginning of the presentation. And the reason for this is because essentially what you're trying to do when you're nervous or excited or anxious or any of these words that we used earlier is you're trying to distract yourself from your own emotions. And one of the best ways to do that is to play a walking chamber of commerce and just go out into the audience. Thank you so much for coming. Hey, can I ask you a question about this topic? I'm curious, what's your biggest challenge with this? So if I was speaking about how to improve your presentations, I might go into the audience today and say, do you ever do any speaking? What kind of speaking do you do? You know, if you could improve one thing about your presentations, what would it be? Now, the questions and even the answers aren't that important. It's the process of relaxing into
Right.
the mindset of the audience so that you can serve them better in your presentation.
You probably feel a little more comfortable since you've met them now and taken a little
But
bit of the edge
presentation's
off of it.
really not about you anyway, is
Right.
it? It's about serving the audience, whether it's a live audience or someone that's going to be watching the video later.
Right.
And by the way, video is now a new medium for us with YouTube, and videos become so easy and such a great way to get messages across that it's a whole new way to do presentations. Won't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And some videos you end up moving a little bit slower or faster, and so that's some unique things we can also maybe address toward the end of the interview here, Terry. One of the things, people practicing, do you recommend that if they do have more than an hour,
Yeah.
let's say they have a couple days or even a week, do you recommend maybe practicing in front of a mirror? Do you
Oh, yeah.
recommend speaking out loud, not just speaking inside, you know, your head, so
Oh,
to
sure.
speak, as you read through your notes? And what are some things that you would recommend?
Video is by far the best, but it scares a lot of people, so they avoid video, and they'll do anything to not practice in a video camera. I remember going through the same thing, and a lot of us did when Gordon Matthews invented voicemail 30 years ago. You know, nobody wanted to record their message
Right.
on their own voicemail recording. But we've got over that, and I think over time we'll get over seeing our own image. There's a poor man's recording technique, and then there's another technique that you can do if you've got a little bit of technical savvy. The poor man's recording technique is to simply call your own voicemail and start reciting your presentation, in particular the beginning, because that's when your central nervous system is under siege. Right? The beginning of your presentation into your voicemail. And then later you want to listen to it and monitor it for things like energy level, volume. Do you sound animated when you're doing your presentation into your voicemail recording? Of course, that's just audio. You can do video recording, which is a little bit more sophisticated. Now you can do it with everything from a cell phone, a smartphone,
Right.
to a flip video or one of the small video cameras, or even a Google Hangout or a Skype call can be recorded, the video portion, for you to look at it and monitor and say, well, I want to smile a little bit more here, or I want to pause for effect, or I want to make a motion that's going to be particularly effective. One motion that's really good at the beginning of a talk, I refer to it as the sun coming up, because again, we close down at the beginning of a presentation. So I'll address the camera right now. We close down into the podium and grip the podium. The sun coming up says that you would actually open up your hands like this, you know, it's such a pleasure to be with you today. And it seems almost too much right now in our little confines of the studio.
So close, right.
But in front of a big audience or even a medium-sized audience, you know, you glance around a little bit, it's such a pleasure to be with you today. It's a very powerful, simple gesture that would let people warm up to you almost immediately.
Right. What about starting with a joke or some kind of humor of some type? And let's say, we'll take an instance that you're at work, it's a work environment, so you know it's probably serious, it's business-like. Do you still try to start with a joke? I know you probably want to start with a smile, like you said that you're happy to be here.
Yeah,
you know, presenting,
smile, I think. Amiable, joke, probably not. And the reason is that all humor makes fun of something or someone.
Right.
So it's a dangerous little thing to walk out onto that ledge. You've already got some issues with it, being excited, nervous, you're not sure what the audience thinks of you, and then you're going to open with something risky or even worse, risque.
Right.
Because one person's idea of something that's funny is another person's version of what's offensive. So probably not a good idea. Also not a good idea to get up in front of the audience and read a joke that you got in an email.
Okay.
Odds are pretty good. They got the same joke in the email. It shows a lack of creativity. It's not your content, and that means you probably won't be able to deliver it in a sincere and professional way. There are so many other ways that you can be clever, and I coach people on this. Humor is a very, very tough thing to learn. It's kind of like learning a musical instrument or singing. It's not for everybody.
And delivering takes a little bit of practice.
Yeah,
too,
the timing of a joke. If you feel like you're good at humor or you want to give it a go, I read one time the formula for a good joke is this. It's you take people down a path where they think they're going, and then you make a quick left turn, followed by another left turn. So you just keep making lefts. And the better you are at humor, the more left turns you can make, and you just keep riffing. It's an old musician term. You keep riffing on that one joke. Later, you can even do what's called a callback by bringing that joke back into the presentation. We see Jay Leno do this every night. David Letterman does it every night, sometimes too much on their own shows.
Right. What about how to handle question and answer sessions? Let's say that is allowed. How do you do that? What, you know, again, because at this point you may not have any pre-prepared questions being given to you, so you have no idea what's going to be asked. How do you best handle that? Or another question might be, if there is, do you recommend people wait to have Q&A at the end or allow Q&A during the presentation?
Fabulous questions. If you wait until the end, you take the chance of forgetting that somebody had a question or leaving them unanswered. Not very professional. On the other hand, it's a dangerous thing to leave your script, especially if you're not a polished professional. I like to take the question as it happens. I like to have other people speaking during my presentation. Think about sales presentations. My dad used to say that nobody never learns anything while they're talking. So if you're speaking and you're trying to sell something and you're trying to figure out the customer's pain or why they would even consider buying your product, you have to give them a chance to talk. And that's why Q&A is a good idea. The problem with Q&A is you're working without a net. Although, after a while, you learn your territory, you learn your product, you learn your presentation, you'll find that most people ask the same questions over and over again. Until you know what those questions are, it can be dicey.
Right. And as you learn those questions, you can probably incorporate the answers within your presentation, which might, again, avoid having to take those questions.
Yes, but you still want the audience to ask the question because it gives them a chance to play with you, you see. If you're the only one talking again, it's not the best presentation. So at some point in the program, 2/3, 3/4 of the way through, how does this sound to you so far? Do you have any questions for me at this time? Just get those out on the table because you want to take care of objections before you do the call to action. Okay. Now, I'm using sales terms right now, but that doesn't mean it has to be a transactional type of sale. Right. Like we said earlier, if you're getting somebody to try a new paper flow or use the product in a different way or just modify their behavior in some way, you want to take care of objections before you do the close. Right. And that's why you say, are there any questions? Okay. So back to this idea of working without a net. You may want to have what's called a ringer question already set up. Dead air is not a good idea. It's not a good idea in our interview today. It's not a good idea during the actual presentation. So when you say, do you have any questions for me, doesn't matter if there's 2 people in the audience or 20 or 200, nobody wants to ask the first question.
Absolutely.
So you keep a little ringer question in your back pocket. And when you say, does anybody have any questions? Then there's a little pause. Nobody says anything. You know, at this point in the program, someone usually has a question about such and such. And now you're asking the first question, which means they can ask the second.
much more comfortable environment a lot versus
Yes.
that person always
Oh, everybody
wanting to
settles
raise
right
their
into
hand
it.
and say,
They get the
right.
rhythm, you know. They realize it's okay to ask questions. Now, the most dangerous part of Q&A, Cynthia, is when someone asks a question that you don't have the answer to. And I learned the trick for this when I was doing public seminars. I've done now 2,000 paid presentations all over the world. And the most dangerous question is the one you can't answer, because you feel stupid or you'll feel like, you know, they aced you. And then, of course, what happens is you do a meltdown, because now they'll never, you know,
Right,
modify
makes you
their
feel
behavior.
this big.
Yeah, your call to action's in the bucket. So here's how you can save yourself from feeling bad when they ask a question that you don't know the answer to. Here it is. Nobody knows everything, even you, the expert. And so you can say things like, geez, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure. Let's find out. How about if I answer you offline? Or, does anybody else in the room know more about this than I do? Sometimes I'll say, does anybody know more about this particular aspect of the presentation than I do? Which saves me a little bit of,
Right.
you know, ego, should I start to be doing the meltdown,
Right.
that everybody in the room is smarter than me. There's always somebody in the room smarter than you. It's okay. You know, and in the age of Google, they're in the audience Googling right now.
Sure.
You know. So it's okay to not have the answer. Be all right with that, and I think you'll be fine.
And I think you're right. I think the best thing is being honest. You know, I don't know that, but I can find out and let you know. And like you said, get the information offline and follow up on that.
Now here's a mistake, by the way. If you have an audience and
Right.
then you know you're a pleaser in front of the room and you want to get back to them, you'll say, "How about if I let you know? I'll get back to you on that." Well, then another person will raise their hand and say, "Could you email me too?
Right.
Could you email?" And now you have this giant homework assignment, and you can never make everybody happy.
Right.
So I wouldn't promise that you're going to get them the answer or email them, especially if it's a large group, because that becomes problematic in follow through.
Okay. So how would you handle that then if you can't make quite the promise?
I
to
might
get
say
back?
something like, I'll post it, that sounds like a great blog post.
Okay.
How about if I give me about a week to address it, always longer than you need.
Right.
And you can go to my website, which is michaelangelocaruso.com, a chance for you to get your website out to everybody, and also play the authority. Now, you didn't have the answer right on the spot, but here you are delivering a week later as promised. Everybody's fine
And
with it.
you get them to go to your website and check that out at the
That's
same
right.
time. So,
That's right.
what about dress? If we talk about men and then maybe women, men, what might be some don'ts for men when they dress in front of an audience?
I like a collared shirt and a jacket. You don't have to wear a tie in today's casual society, but I think a jacket makes you look professional.
Okay.
And I like this little guy right here. This is called a pocket square. And when you're presenting, people like to know that you're on top of your game or that you're better than the average bear. And a little pocket square somehow lets people know that you're paying attention to detail. It's just one of those little things that just works.
Do you know what men do that you would say is one of the biggest errors that men do when
Yes,
they dress?
they leave their jackets unbuttoned.
Okay.
When they're standing. Now, we're seated today, so it's okay to be casual
Okay.
with a jacket. But if you're standing, you should wear close your jacket up. And if you're a little heavy or overweight or even self-conscious about your weight, you should wear a double-breasted jacket and still make sure that it's buttoned.
Okay. What about for ladies? The first thing that comes to mind when I think about that might be if you have bracelets that bangle if you talk, you know,
Sure,
or move
sure.
around, or earrings or something. Is there something that you might address for women?
I think ladies in general are better with what we call the appointments, which is the jewelry and the dress. Women would dress up in general more for a presentation than the average guy would. What ladies have to watch is what are called nonverbal communication, NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming. It's all the same thing.
Okay.
For our listeners that want to know more about NLP, they don't have to worry about the spelling of
Yeah.
neuro-linguistic programming. Just type NLP into your browser and your computer will go into gridlock. There's a lot of information about body language. Women, according to behavioral psychologists, make 8 times more major body movements per hour than men. What are we talking about? We're talking about flipping of the hair, fixing of the clothes, pulling down of the sweater, all of which are terribly distracting, especially if you're trying to be taken seriously and you want people to stay on content.
Okay.
So I would recommend for the women to be very careful, and that's where video comes in. You can kind of monitor
Right.
anything that you're doing that might be distracting. Men and women, Cynthia, do, and I would demonstrate if we could get up, but I know we can't, is a little kick as they're speaking, a little kick, or they pace too much, or some people try to act assertive, but while they're acting assertive, they actually take a half a step backwards.
Okay.
Not a
Yeah.
good idea.
Interesting.
That's what we call not being congruent. You want to say what you do when you speak. And if you say, I really think you should do this now, but you're taking a half a step backward as you say it, or I really believe in this product. Watch this. I really believe in this product. It just doesn't look the same.
No, not at all.
So these are some of the things to watch out for.
Right. As we conclude the interview, if you had to give like the top 3 maybe items that you would have someone who's going to give speeches or be in front of an audience or even maybe even just in a group environment around a circular table, what would it be?
Sure. First would be to begin with the end in mind. Start with a call to action. What is the one thing that you want people to do as a result of the presentation? The second thing, of course, would be to know your material. Know what you're talking about. Something about watching TV or the Kardashians or whatever has us very casual about presenting anymore, and I think it's so much more helpful for you to actually know your content. And the third is to actually practice the drill, especially the beginning of the presentation, which you should practice 10 to 1 over the middle of the presentation, or even the end, the call to action, which is so important. Practice the beginning.
Right. And what's the best way to deliver that call for action? A short statement at the end? Or?
I like something called weaving, which would have me weaving the call to action throughout the presentation and setting you up for it. Never to take advantage of you, but just to have you predisposed to acting on it when we finally do get to the end. Today in my presentation with you, I've tried to entice you a little bit about, and the viewers, about how they could improve their presentations by giving them some information, some nuggets that they don't know. About 2/3 of the way through the interview, I leaked my website to you and to the viewers. And here at the end, we'll give you a chance to buy my, or at least look up my new product, which is Present Like a Pro. It's a DVD.
Right.
And all of this has been to not be transparent about the fact that I've got a new product out, but to stage it in a way that would entice you to want to know more about it. If we had opened with the call to action, buy my DVD, it wouldn't be
Probably
nearly as
turn people
effective.
off. Yep.
And
Well,
you
Michael,
know this too as
absolutely.
a professional interviewer.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us here today. We're honored to have you back here. And as you know, we've showed you the website, and Michael actually mentioned it, michaelangelocaruso.com. So again, thank you for being on here. I wish you the best of luck in all the presentations you may do. Thanks for watching. I'm Cindy Kainz.